911 dispatchers of Reddit. What are some of the dumbest calls you've gotten? Story 1 kind of relevant. Worked in the Coast Guard where one of my jobs was the same thing as a dispatcher with radios and phones and boats instead of cars to respond. One day someone called me to tell me their young daughter was just kidnapped. I asked them if the kidnapper was on a boat or near the water. They said no. The caller just didn't think it was a big enough issue to call 911, so they called the Coast Guard instead. Edit. Wow, this really blew up. For people asking for an update, I unfortunately do not have one. I was worried about getting them to the right resource quickly, so I took some of the caller's basic info and told them to hang up with me and call 911. I also called 911 and passed along the information just in case. I looked for a news article that was similar to the caller's story for weeks, but never found one. I really hope that means that it was a stupid hoax call or the girl was found very quickly. Story 2. I've been a dispatcher for about 7 years now in a medium-sized county in Florida. Every year on July 4th and New Year's we get calls about gunshots. Every single time the caller is perfectly convinced they're gunshots and couldn't possibly be fireworks. They'll say they hear automatic weapons, or my personal favorite rapid-fire shotguns. And every single time a deputy goes out to investigate, it turns out to be the unlikely culprit of fireworks. I had one woman call 911 to tell me she found a cell phone on the ground. That's it. Irate elderly male calls 911 while standing in the sheriff's office lobby to report the clerk not being helpful. When I told him that's not something you use a 911 line for, he went ape, going as far as threatening to break into the office and shoot me. He was subsequently arrested. Male was arrested for domestic battery, called 911 from the back seat of the patrol car and stated he was being unlawfully imprisoned. When I told him the only thing I could do for him was to send him more deputies, he said, no thanks, and hung up. He then proceeded to call 3 more times looking for a different answer. We told the deputies on scene. They took his phone away and added a charge of misuse of 911. Had a woman call in stating she accidentally took too much melatonin. She started getting hysterical when she felt the effects of her overdose. She was getting sleepy. Story 3. Yesterday morning was a cold one in my area. Icy conditions on the roads, widespread crashes, all the good stuff. Lady calls in and complains about a suspicious substance on the road that made her car slip. She was driving too fast to see what it was, but insisted that something strange was afoot. Story 4. Too many to count. If I had to pick a favorite, I'd have to choose the time a concerned citizen called in an animal stuck in a tree. That animal was a... Story 5. Middle of night shift. Get a report of a guy trying to ride on a moose. Officer attends. There is indeed a male trying to ride said moose. Male is wearing a high-vis vest and a helmet, which his girlfriend made him put on for safety reasons, of course. Story 6. A lady ran over herself with her own car. She called to let us know she was okay. This was fall of 2012. Hope she's still doing okay. Edit. That blew up. For those wondering, this was in CA. The lady was calm, laughed nervously embarrassed a couple times, absolutely refused any type of response, even quiet from EFD, and didn't say how it happened. We took down her info, gave the typical safety admonishment, told her to call back if she needed to. Once my dad got a call from the 911 dispatch. At first he was really confused because he didn't call them in the first place. They asked, "Sir, do you have a daughter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Well, she just called and claimed you broke her heart. Apparently my sister got in trouble when she was about 5 or 6 and called 911 claiming my daddy broke my heart." She hung up in embarrassment after the dispatcher began laughing. Edit. I like this formatting better. Story 7. 1. Every Thanksgiving you'll always get the person who calls because they don't know how long to cook a turkey. Never fails. 2. Every Thanksgiving someone always puts a frozen turkey in a deep fryer, usually in a trailer home, and a fire surprisingly occurs. 3. People who have warrants on themselves love calling to complain and ask to see the police in person for a dispute. They don't seem to remember we look up everyone in the dispute, not just the accused. Story 8. We have a call that every new trainee at my county listens to during training, because it highlights how completely oblivious our callers can truly be. A neighbor enters her friend's house because she's not answering the door. She finds the patient on the couch sleeping. She calls 911 because she's not waking up. She says she's not moving, not answering me or waking up. It looks like she has been cooking with blueberries. Her hands are all blue. Operator already knows that means she's dead. We send everyone out. EMS arrives on scene first and immediately backs out. According to the deputy that arrived right after, she had a gun in hand, shot herself in the head, and it splattered all over the wall behind her. Our caller never even noticed. Story 9. Got a call from a woman in the wee hours of the morning, clearly drunk and slurring. She says, "I want you to send an ossifer to my house and talk me to the bar, wait while a drunk, and then talk me home." "Me ma'am, I think you're looking for a taxi service." Her, "Well, you guys suspended my license." Time passes. Her, "Okay, HM ready, come in me." "Me ma'am, I already told you we are not a taxi." Her, "AHGOTS warrants." Me, "Oh well, in that case they said she fought like a prize fighter." Story 10. I'm super drunk and I got run over by a sled. Now in northern Alberta typically this would mean a snowmobile and potentially life-threatening injuries. No, his kid hit his ankle bone with a wooden toboggan. Didn't even have a bruise. Edit spelling. Story 11. Around 3 a.m. me county 911. "Do you need police, fire, or medical?" Caller, "Nope. I'm calling to report there is no emergency." Me, "Okay, you don't need any assistance." Caller, "No sir, everything is good here." Me, "Okay, well you called an emergen." Caller, click, "Well I guess I'll go myself then, thanks bud." Story 12. I'm not a 911 dispatcher, but I'm a central station operator. I'm the lady that asks what your password is when your alarm goes off. Been at my job 5 years. My favorite call ever was the second call I made to the house of an old couple. Their alarm had gone off about 30 minutes prior. They weren't sure why the alarm was sounding, so they asked me for the police to be dispatched. On the second call, the wife answered the phone, gave me all the correct information, and then passed the phone to the officer. The alarm was still sounding, but there was another weird beep in the background. We walked the owners through shutting their system off, but this beep was still going off. The officer was getting frustrated, and the homeowners weren't sure why the alarm is still sounding, so they wanted me to shut the alarm down. I told him that our system was shut off and the beeping wasn't from us. The officer then went looking for the sound. He found out it was their alarm clock sounding. I swear I heard him roll his eyes through the phone, and I tried my best not to laugh. He handed the phone back to the older couple, who still had no idea what was going on, but said the officer told them everything was okay. TLDR, old couple has us dispatch PD because of strange beeping noise. Officer arrives to find out it was their alarm clock. Edit, I can't spell. Also more details. Story 13. My mom was a dispatcher in Arizona after college back in the 70s, and told me a great story about a call she got, or rather a series of calls from an Indian man, Indian, not Native American. I can't recall what the original distress call was about, but after that first call, he started calling back all the time because he thought she had a sexy voice. She told me he would turn the charm level up to 11, trying to woo her in his thick Indian accent. Apparently, as soon as she would answer the call, his opening line was "Hello Control, I love you," and she'd have to hold back her laughter. Edit, talked to mom this morning, and posted this as a reply below, but I'll paste it here too. Okay, so I talked to her this morning, my recollection was close enough, and she did give me one more story. More twisted, differently funny. So she gets a call from a payphone, guy is slurring his words, but she makes out something that sounds like "I cut off my penis," so to be safe, she sends out an ambulance to the location of the payphone and relays what she thinks happened. When they arrive on scene, EMT picks up the phone still off the hook and tells her that yes, the dude is sitting in a pile of blood with his hand, separated from his body. EMT just says yep, he cut it off, and ends the call to tend to the man's self-inflicted wounds. Turns out he was a depressed veteran who wanted to be a woman, and took matters into his own hands. Edit, too glad so many people got a kick out of my mom's Indian stud. She's not a Redditor, but all your replies had her laughing her off this morning. Story 14. Some lady wanted the fire department to come burn her house down because she thought a demon lived in it. I sent paramedics and police to check on her, but I told her we'd be happy to burn her house down in a controlled training capacity if she wanted to donate it, but there was a lot of paperwork to get that started. Story 15. Me 911. What's your emergency? Caller, there is a horse laying down in a field. Me, do you believe it is injured? Caller, no, it just normally stands up. Me, yeah, we will have a deputy go look at it. And yes, the horse was okay. Story 16. So I am not a dispatcher, but I was a witness to this call while in high school. About 2 months after the Columbine shootings, I was hanging out after school by the JROTC building at my high school. JROTC is Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, essentially pre-military for U.S. high schools. The JROTC had a drill team, YouTube link to get an idea, but the rifles are dummy-weighted, realistic-looking rifles that can't fire and could only be used as a club. The drill team was practicing after school, and after one guy missed the catch after throwing his rifle in the air, it came down and knocked him unconscious with a gash on his head. Spoiler. Looked nasty but not life-threatening. The teacher, a former Navy officer, immediately started first aid and told a student to call 911. Cell phones weren't as prevalent then, and the kid went inside the building to use the phone. Now this is the dumb part. The student, panicking, told the 911 operator that his friend was hit by a rifle, be at a high school, and was bleeding out. SWAT got there in about 7 minutes, sees a bunch of kids holding what appear to be rifles. Yeah, it was a clusterfuck. 1 ambulance out of 10 sent got there eventually after SWAT gave the all clear. The kid hit by the rifle was okay but needed around 10 stitches and ended up with a new nickname of Snipe. Story 17. Repo companies in the area report their repos to us, just in case the owner decides to try and report the car stolen. I started my shift that day logging several. When one of the owners calls in, we take his info, confirm it matches, and let him know it was reported as repossessed and to contact his finance company. A little while later, he calls 911 again to let us know that he paid it up to date and the address they gave him to pick up the car didn't exist, so he wanted to report it stolen. We again refer him to his finance company. A few hours later, he called 911 again. He checked his onboard GPS signal and saw it listed his car in another city, the next state over, so he had driven there and searched the city, but didn't find it, so it had to be stolen. We again explain it was repoed and to continue speaking with his financial institution. The day carries on, and we eventually get to the end of the shift. As we are wrapping everything up for our shift up before night shift gets in, he calls 911 again. He found the tow yard his car was stored at, but it was closed for the night. He needed us to open it for him so he could claim his car. We explained that it was a private business and the car wasn't stolen, so we can't just bust in and take his car. He will have to claim the car once they are open in the morning. He was so moved by our logic that he decided to try reporting it as stolen again. Edit, my biggest comment ever, I should have asked for gold. Story 18. My husband used to dispatch before he was old enough to go to the police academy. We lived in a small town, ranked 3rd most dangerous in our state, lots and lots of drug use. There was a woman who was honestly crazy. I don't know if she had mental problems before the drugs or if the drugs fried her brain, but she was a regular caller. Some of her calls, she called and said that she was raped. After coaxing some info out of her, she said she knew who did it. It was her stuffed bear. Another time she called to report a break-in because she fell asleep with her blanket wrapped around her, but when she woke up it was bundled at her feet. She called one summer night, routinely got over 115 degrees in the summer, and said that she had walked 3 miles from her apartment and needed a ride back because she was barefoot and her feet hurt. He asked her where her shoes were and she said she was carrying them. She walked 3 miles and didn't think to put them on. Another call wasn't stupid but still stuck with me. It was a domestic violence call, and when he asked what was going on, the woman yelled he threw a piping hot chicken pot pie at me. Something about her attention to detail I just thought was funny in an unfunny situation. Story 19. I had a woman call 911 to ask if it was legal to sell a baby. I had a guy call to report information on a drug dealer because the dealer had sold him meth instead of coke. The guy said this was an ongoing issue and he had finally had enough. Story 20. A man called 911 on himself because he was driving drunk, so he pulled over and waited for the police to get there. They got there and offered him a ride home. He's still getting charged, but he insisted that they take him down to county. He really wanted to go to jail, so he did. Another time, I picked up the phone. The caller says something about spires in her lungs. It was really hard to understand her. She had a heavy lisp and just didn't talk right. I'm thinking maybe she recently had some sort of surgical operation on her lungs and she needs medical assistance. Maybe some sort of stent or something, I didn't know. After clarifying with her, I found out she was talking about the spiders in her lungs. She went on to say that a demented goat just ate her dog and spat it out as a demon in her front yard and something about the CIA. And that's when I realized she was insane. Generally speaking, most calls are actually pretty dumb. Especially when people cluster up the 911 lines with calls that aren't emergencies. Please learn your local police and fire department's non-emergency dispatch number. There's a good chance the dispatch center might not even be in your city, but it should be able to be found with a few Googles. 911. What's the address of your emergency? Well, this isn't an emergency, but then stop talking. Call this number instead. Has to be one of the most frequent interactions between dispatchers and callers. Edit for everyone saying they're calling the non-emergency dispatch number and are being told to call 911. You're probably calling the police department's administrative number, which will likely stop taking calls around 4 or 5. They are clerks in cubicles and can't help you as they are not dispatchers. You need to find the number for the department's dispatch center. But people are right that in some jurisdictions call centers can be separated from each other, where 911 and non-emergency lines are routed to different locations. In some areas you might even find that dispatch centers are different for the city's fire and police department. In terms of functionality and operation, this never makes sense to me, because where I work we're all trained for police, fire, EMS dispatch and take 911 and non-ER calls at the same PSAP. We just separate our responsibilities internally, i.e. we will have 2 dispatching for police, 2 for fire EMS, and 2 primary call takers. If the call takers get swamped, then we can jump one of their incoming calls to help out. If fire side gets swamped with a structure fire or something, the caller takers and police side can always help them out on their radios or whatever if needs done. It can be confusing, and unfortunately it's not always easy for people to figure out who they should call, or they'll just be directed to 911 like it seems to be the case for a lot of you. It's the state's job usually to mandate how 911 operates, but IMO they give too much power to the counties, which leads to a lot of lackluster and confusion between agencies and citizens. Anyways, if you do find it, put the number in your contacts list as something simple, i.e. Columbus Dispatch, so it can easily be found. Story 21. Not a dispatcher, but I have a story about a dumb 911 call. My ex's mom wouldn't buy him McDonald's. The guy is 15. His mom said no, there's food at home. So being an adult he calls 911. Then he's ashamed of calling 911, so doesn't say anything. One of his sisters is screaming at him for being an idiot and the other is laughing hysterically. His mom had to get on the phone and explain she raised a bratty kid who throws tantrums when he's told no. Story 22. Obligatory. Not a 911 dispatcher, but I live in northern British Columbia where seeing moose and other wildlife is a pretty common thing. Anyways, we had an exchange student from someplace that apparently never has seen wildlife before. A moose was apparently in her driveway and was happily munching on a tree. She freaked the out and called 911 reporting a large 4-legged Sasquatch was eating her tree. I mean really, she came on an exchange to Canada and had never even heard of a moose. Story 23. Working right now. My favorite call of all time was up in arms about lobsters being reserved at the local grocery store. He had a fit, and called back a few times, screaming and crying from the seafood counter in a store I used to work for. I eventually sent an officer, threw an even bigger fit in the store. Dinner was cancelled and Lobster Man spent a night in jail. I called my old coworker to get the play-by-play from inside the store. Story 24. I'm not a 911 dispatcher. However, I have a funny story involving my work and a 911 call. I work as a game master for an escape room company. We have a particular room that involves a phone, in which you need to input the correct phone number into it to progress in the room. It's not a real phone, but one of the players had said, "Dial 911." Their Apple Watch then dialed 911. They apologized and said that they were hostages in an escape room. Luckily the dispatcher understood they were playing a game and not real hostages. For those wondering, if you input 911 into the phone in that room, it will say something along the lines of "you are unable to make the call as dialed." Story 25. Not me, but I had a dispatcher friend who had a call. A passerby on the sidewalk heard screaming. Turns out a couple was getting frisky. The wife was tied up on the bed, naked, and her husband was, except for a Superman cape. He jumped up to get on the bed, hit his head on the ceiling fan and knocked himself out cold. The wife started screaming, and the passerby checked it out and called the police. Story 26. Old woman called the non-emergency line complaining that people were parking under her tree and it was killing her tree's roots. I asked if they were parked in her yard. Nope, they were legally parked on the street. She started ranting and yelling. I passed it down the chain to the traffic sergeant. Crazy tree lady started calling daily. She never did get her no parking signs, mostly because of all the name calling. Story 27. Answered a 911 call from a gentleman stating someone was chasing him. He had no idea where he was other than it was near the beach. I used the phase 2 location from his cell phone to start officers while I tried to get more information, because English was not his first language and he seemed extremely panicked. He's in a vehicle and another vehicle was chasing him. I heard sirens in the background and asked him if he knew who was chasing him. He said yes, that it was Border Patrol, and he was scared, and refused to pull over for them. I convinced him to pull over for one of my officers and that was the end of it. TLDR. Illegal immigrant called 911 because Border Patrol was chasing him. Story 28. 3 a.m. Got a call about a suspicious vehicle outside of her house. I start getting the description and get my officers en route. When she says they're leaving, I get the direction they are headed and relay it. I've got 4 officers converging like a net on this guy. Now that I've got a moment, I ask the woman what exactly did they do. She replies they just stopped at the stop sign for a moment and then they moved on. Story 29. My favorite was one taken by a coworker. She had a guy who called to report hearing gunshots. He was the kind of pompous who insisted he could tell her the caliber of the gun from the sound of the shots. The officers were checking the area, and he called back. What he insisted was a certain caliber gunshot was actually a can of Coke exploding in his freezer. My most recent was a lady today who kept calling because she wanted to complain about her husband having their children. They are going through a divorce, but still legally married. In our state that means they have equal custody rights. She just kept telling me that he wasn't a U.S. citizen, and she didn't like it when I told her that didn't matter. She actually asked me to send somebody to deport him. I politely declined that. Story 30. No joke. An old lady called and complained about the black foreigners which were just going for a walk. There are so much people who call us about things which has nothing to do with us, and some people are really racist. Story 31. Going to let you in on a secret. Most 911 calls are pretty dumb, and not emergencies. I work overnights, so most of the time the calls we get are pretty legit, but occasionally. I've had the guy call in because he was looking at weather radar and said that law enforcement, NOAA, and the CIA were covering up the fact that the storm he was looking at was going to destroy the city. There was no storm, there was no rain or wind, it was clear outside, had been for weeks and remained that way for weeks afterward. Another woman called in because she said someone broke into her home and was now currently sitting on her couch looking at his phone. She said some noise woke her up and she saw the light from his phone when she opened the bedroom door. I asked the usual questions, including if she had a dog and whether it was alerting to the noise. She said the dog was asleep in the bed and that he usually barks at strange noises. Huge clue that nothing is happening. Most dogs will alert to strange noises at night. Officer goes on scene, doesn't see anything. Turns out the light she saw was from one of those electronic picture frames that she owned and knew about. Another break-in call. Woman calls at around 2:30 in the morning. Says she heard someone knocking on her door and heard some noises outside. I've got 2 or 3 officers headed her way. Through our conversation, I find out she is hiding in the closet. Then, I ask when the last time she heard or saw something strange. She gets very quiet and says that she last heard something at around 11 p.m. Turns out she had been working up the nerve to call 911, sitting in the closet for 3.5 hours. These are some of the more memorable ones I've had recently. Story 32 reminds me of reading the sheriff's blotter in my rural county's newspaper. Man called to report he sneezed 23 times. Woman reports odd noise outside her home. Police discover a branch moving in the wind. Was always good for a chuckle. Story 33. I got a call one night about 3 a.m. I hear a buzzing noise coming from my neighbor. I bet it's a meth lab. Sent an officer with the lowest of priorities. Turns out it was a vibrator and not a meth lab. If you're wondering, yes, this was in Florida. Story 34. Not a 911 dispatcher. I was a firefighter though, and I can give you 3 off the top of my head. 1 4 a.m. call of smell of gas, which is weird because in my service area most houses have electric stoves. We get there, it's from a weed eater that fell over. 2. Smell of smoke right after the first cold snap all year, usually late November early December in FL. Everyone is turning on their heaters for the first time since last year. The dust is burning off and they're calling 911 reporting a smell of smoke. This goes on for days. 3. My personal favorite. Middle of July during a torrential summer thunderstorm at 7 p.m. we get a call from an elderly woman who is called in a lightning strike that has set a tree on fire. We get there, jump out of the cab to see a hysterical woman screaming that it's burning and it's going to spread to her house. It's a streetlight. She has glaucoma. Story 35. I had a buddy who had a massive panic attack and called 911 screaming about how he forgot how to breathe. Poor guy was training to be a lawyer and just freaked out before one of his big tests. Edit. It was good that he called and it wasn't like he didn't believe it. It was just a very odd couple of minutes. Story 36. Regular caller. Lady used to call all the time, convinced that her ex-husband was stalking her and secretly living on her second floor. the second floor of her 3-room trailer home, also had another regular caller. Woman kept seeing ninjas in her trees, pointed to one once telling the officer, "Look, can't you see their glowing eyes?" Story 37. Friend of mine who is an ambulance officer was called out because the caller couldn't breathe as advised by the dispatcher. He turned up to the house to find it was on fire. The caller couldn't breathe because of all the smoke, probably should have asked for the fire brigade and got out of there. Story 38. I heard about a lady who called the police because there was a spider on the door handle of her car. This was in Australia, so they sent out 3 cop cars and an ambulance just in case. Story 39. EMT and dispatcher for a private company with several 911 contracts since 2011, everything under the sun from common cold to not being able to sleep, people driving calling in to let us know that somebody they saw walking looked sick. They usually refuse to give us a callback or an address, so pretty literally just calling to let us know. One of our homeless regulars jumped out of a dumpster to mug somebody and stubbed his toe landing. Constipation. The panicked roll over that was just a kid who fell off his big wheel, and yes, he got fire, rescue, police, and ALS sent to him. There was no language barrier. Numerous calls for people fainting in church after finding Jesus, typically on Sundays. There are hundreds if not thousands of others. These were just the first that came to mind. I also want to take a second to elaborate a bit. I spend most of my time servicing an extremely poor community gripped by addiction, violence, and racism. And while everything I've listed is a ridiculous reason to call 911 for medical aid and probably a bit humorous, I think it's important to remember how little these people have. It feels like the majority of the city is unemployed. Most of them don't have a high school education. They live in a world where violence is on every corner. There are a lot of things they can't handle by themselves or how you or I would probably handle it, because they haven't had the opportunities you or I have had. A lot of them are also immigrants who live and work with only other immigrants and speak almost no English. The concept of 911 here doesn't translate well to them. You or I think if there is a dire emergency to call, to them it's a culture of if you have a problem any problem call, and it's hard to re-educate. We can't exactly get a bunch of the first responders at a public meeting and announce stop calling us for this, so we essentially have to find teachable moments on nonsense calls and try one person at a time. Which is a losing fight in a city of 100,000. Anywho, just something to think about before you read one from this thread and think what an idiot. Story 40. A father requested an ambulance to take his son from one hospital's ED to go to another hospital's ED. Dad was upset because the nurses were trying to take a rectal temp from the boy, and according to Dad this was going to turn him gay. The boy was less than 2 years old, and very sick. Dad was perfectly willing to delay his care several hours out of some of the most profound ignorance I have ever encountered. We did not send him an ambulance, because that would have been illegal, but also because Dad is a piece of. We did get the police and child protective services over there though, and the father was removed from the hospital for his violent behavior. Edit spelling, was on mobile this morning. It is pretty dumb to misspell ignorance, haha. Story 41. Dispatcher for an alarm company. One time had this guy call because he wanted me to send the police. He was outside his house and saw that the front door was open, so he called us to have us call the police. Why couldn't he do it himself, you ask? Well, because that's what we're here for. Kicker, he didn't even use our services, so I could not dispatch the police for him. That guy wasted 7 minutes on the phone arguing with me. Story 42. So many, but the woman that locked herself inside her car was probably among the worst. One that I initially thought was going to be the dumbest was a truck driver wanted the fire department to come out and spray down a trailer full of hogs she was hauling. Colleague pointed out that it was a summer day. The driver's rig was broken down, and without the wind blowing in the trailer that whole load of hogs would have died, so I ended up being the dumb one for thinking it was dumb. Story 43. I actually had a good one last night. Not the dumbest, but the only one I can think of off the top of my head since it's so fresh. Guy calls in about a dog barking at his neighbor's house and describes the barking as abnormal and that the dog has barked before but not like this. I try to get him to elaborate what was strange or unusual about it, like if the dog was in distress or if the RP thought something might be wrong with the neighbor and the dog was alerting. Guy keeps talking in circles while I'm trying to determine if this is just a regular barking dog call or if this is a higher priority welfare check. When I try rewording my questions to describe what's weird about the barking, the RP starts imitating the dog barking. He gets snarky and keeps barking over me. I can do this all day. I ended up putting in a call for a barking dog, sigh ha. Story 44. A friend of mine wasn't 911 dispatch, but he's an officer who had to work a desk for a period of time. He got these 2 calls in successive days. Day 1, I can't find my lotto ticket and am sure I won. Day 2, I live in Canada, but I got a text from your area code that I don't recognize and it says she's dead. How do we hide it? The first call was dismissed. The second actually led to 2 arrests for murder. Story 45. Man called me twice at 300 and 330-ish in the morning to tell me about the swamp things. He was so drunk, I almost sent someone out on a wellness check, just to make sure he didn't pickle himself to death though. To be fair, I suspect he had long experience. He wanted it on record that if anyone hurt one of them, he was gone. Have they? I assured him that I had entered that into the report in large letters. This was, in fact, true. He ended the second call with, I seen them when I was a kid, and they're back. Hell of a thing to hear at 3:30 a.m. on a solo shift. That's how horror movies start. Story 46. I wasn't the dispatcher, but when I was an EMT we got called out around 1 a.m. for an uncontrolled bleed. We roll up, hop out, get greeted by a guy probably in his 70s standing at the door. Calm as calm can be. Hey man, what's going on? Oh nothing, I just had a nosebleed earlier, okay? Well it looks like it's not bleeding anymore. Yeah, oh no, it stopped around 5. Okay, well are you feeling okay? You feel weak, have any pain, etc, etc, etc. No, I feel fine, but like, it bled a lot, but it stopped, yeah, and you feel fine, yeah, so what's the problem then? Should I go see my doctor or something? Do you want to see your doctor? That's why I called you. Since we can't just off and leave without him agreeing, and us having no reason to transport him, vitals were fine, no real chief complaint, it took us in fire department talking to him for 30 minutes at 1 in the morning to just have him agree that he would just see his doctor in the morning if he was that concerned about his nosebleed that had already stopped 8 hours earlier. Story 47, something I can contribute to. I have been a call taker for the police and ambulance, and there's always one that comes to mind when I get asked this question. It was about 2 a.m. on a weekday morning, and a lady called up and said that they're a badger trying to get out of her garden gate and it's making a bit of a racket keeping her awake. She's unwilling to go down there and open the gate for it because she's worried it will become aggressive with her and wants me to send an officer to open the gate. I repeat back to her, you want me to send a police officer to come and open your back gate to let a badger out? And this obviously had the desired effect of making her realize how ridiculous she was being because she just said, well, you're not very helpful, are you? And hung up. I'm sure there have been many others, but this is the one that really takes the biscuit.